So let's dive into one of the strangest, most haunting stories from 20th century Europe, the story of Léon Degrelle. Get this, you're condemned to death for treason by your own country, but you spend the next 50 years not hiding in a bunker, but building a legend right out in the open. This is the story of Rexism and the man who became its ghost.
I mean, just think about that for a second. No remorse. Not a single apology. Decades after the end of World War II, this was Degrelle's final take on everything he'd done. It's a defiant, honestly chilling statement, and it's pretty much the key to understanding the man and the myth he worked so hard to build.
And here it is, plain and simple. In 1944, he's sentenced to be shot. Fast forward 50 years to 1994, and he dies of old age in a hospital in Spain. He was never punished. He literally outlived his accusers, his own political party, and even some of the historians who wrote about his crimes.
So how on earth does that happen? That's the big question we're trying to answer here. How does a nation's most infamous traitor not only escape justice, but manage to rebrand himself as some kind of hero to the far right? It's a real mystery, and we're about to unpack it.
Okay, so to really get a grip on the legacy of Rexism, we first have to understand the guy who started it all, the charismatic and deeply controversial Léon Degrelle. You see, he wasn't just one thing. In the 1930s, he was this gifted speaker who could absolutely electrify a crowd. Then, during the war, he became a full-blown, enthusiastic collaborator with the Nazis. And after that, for half a century, he was this tireless writer and propagandist, carefully crafting his own story from his exile in Spain.
So you gotta ask, right? Why would anyone follow a man like Degrelle in the first place? To answer that, we have to rewind to the 1930s. Belgium was a deeply divided country, and it created the perfect storm for a movement like Rexism to just erupt.
Belgium has always been, well, a complicated place. A future prime minister once joked that the only things that were really Belgian were the king, the soccer team, and a few good beers. And back in the 30s, that wasn't just a joke, it was a painful reality. The country was so fractured, it left this vacuum of national identity that a guy like Degrelle was more than ready to
Basically, it boils down to this. In the north, you had Flanders. It was mostly Dutch-speaking, deeply Catholic, and politically right-leaning. In the south, you had Wallonia. It was French-speaking, much more secular, and leaned to the left. These weren't just small disagreements, they were deep cultural fault lines. And Degrelle knew exactly how to play them against each other.
So what was Rexism at the beginning? Well, it actually grew out of a Catholic publishing house called Christus Rex, which means Christ the King. At first, its message sounded pretty appealing to a lot of people. It called for a Catholic crusade against corrupt politicians, and it rallied support around two really powerful symbols, the Catholic Church and the Belgian monarchy. The name Rex itself means king in Latin, which was a clever nod to both Christ the King and their own King Leopold III.
But, and this is a big but, this whole moral crusade thing, it took a really, really dark turn. When World War II broke out, Rexism morphed from a nationalist protest movement into a tool for Nazi Germany. This is where Degrelle made his pact with the devil.
As the war went on, they dropped any pretense of being Belgian patriots. Rexism went all in, fully embracing the ideology of Hitler's Nazi party. Degrelle started openly praising Hitler. His followers wore Nazi-style uniforms. And this is the most damning part, he formed the Walloon Legion. This was a unit of Belgian volunteers he sent to go fight and die for Germany on the brutal Eastern Front.
And for these actions, he was condemned. I mean, look at these charges. They were severe. This wasn't about having the wrong political opinions. He was charged with taking up arms against his own country, raising an army for the enemy, leading armed gangs. The Belgian state didn't see him as a political opponent. They saw him as an active military threat.
And you can see here on the map where a lot of this was happening. The conflict tore through Belgium's industrial heartland, the Sion Industriel. This whole area was crucial for the German war machine, so it became this brutal battleground where Rexist collaborators were fighting Belgian resistance fighters. This wasn't some abstract political debate. This was literally Belgians fighting Belgians on their own streets.
So, he was condemned to death. But here's the thing. A death sentence doesn't mean much if no one's around to carry it out. Degrelle was never caught. Instead, he escaped. And this is where the second act of his life begins. Not as a politician, not as a soldier, but as a mythmaker.
In the final chaotic days of the war, Degrelle fled, crash-landing his plane on a beach in Spain, and there he found a protector in Francisco Franco's fascist regime. Belgium kept asking for Spain to extradite him, but Franco always refused. And from this safe haven, Degrelle started to build his own legend.
And he wasn't just, quietly living out his days. Oh no. This was an active, decades-long propaganda campaign. He was constantly writing, publishing memoirs that romanticized his cause. He was surprisingly media-savvy, always ready to give an interview where he would deny the Holocaust or praise Hitler. And he kept up the image, defiantly wearing Nazi-style uniforms well into the 1990s, making sure he stayed an icon for new generations of extremists.
And this quote from his own memoir, it just perfectly sums up the story he was trying to sell. He frames his experience in the war not as a political crime, but as some kind of spiritual test, a noble sacrifice for a grand ideal. He was painting himself as a martyr, a righteous knight who suffered for a higher cause, while conveniently leaving out that the cause was treason and collaboration with the Nazis.
So, what's Degrelle's legacy in Belgium today? You might think he's just a forgotten footnote from a dark past, but actually, his ghost has been haunting the halls of the Belgian parliament for decades.
After the war, the word Rex got a whole new life. It became a political weapon, an insult you'd hurl across the aisle in parliament at anyone you thought was being extreme, anti-democratic, or just fundamentally un-Belgian. The party was long dead, but its name lived on as a political curse.
And the numbers, wow. The data from the Belgian parliament really tells the story. Between 1944 and 1999, Degrelle's name was brought up 263 times. Now compare that to the VNV, which was the main Flemish collaborationist party. They were only mentioned 60 times. He was gone, but his memory was being used more than 4 times as often as his counterparts. He became the ultimate symbol of treason.
Which brings us to a final thought. Degrelle's party disappeared in 1945. He died in 1994. But as long as his name is still being used as an attack in politics, as long as his self-made myth continues to inspire extremists, and as long as his story serves as a warning, are he and Rexism really gone? It really makes you wonder, can an ideology ever truly die as long as its memory can still be used as a weapon?